The year was 2033, and humanity had reached new frontiers in space exploration. The James Webb Space Telescope, a marvel of human ingenuity, had been orbiting the Lagrange point 2 for over a decade, sending back data from the farthest reaches of the universe. Its infrared eyes had peered into galaxies long since gone, stared into stars that had burned out eons ago, and uncovered secrets that had eluded us for millennia. Dr. Evelyn Harper sat in the control room of the Space Science Institute in Greenbelt, Maryland. Staring at the screen in front of her, her hands hovered over the keyboard, but her mind was far from her work. She had been assigned to analyze the telescope's most recent data, seemingly unremarkable observations of a star in the constellation Pegasus, but something about this star kept pulling at her thoughts. It wasn't unusual for the telescope to send back data on distant stars, but this particular one, designated HD 192273, was different. At first glance, it looked like just another red giant, an aging star expanding as it neared the end of its life. But Evelyn, a veteran astrophysicist, had learned to trust her instincts. There was something about the signal it was sending that felt wrong. "Dr. Harper," a voice broke her from her thoughts. It was Tyler, one of the junior researchers. "We're still not sure what to make of the signal. Are you sure we should pursue this further?" Evelyn's eyes flicked to the screen again, the data pulsing in a rhythmic, almost biological pattern. Stars didn't behave like this. Stars didn't pulse like a living thing. "Pull up the visual feed from the spectrometer," she said, voice calm but sharp. Tyler typed in a series of commands, and the screen flickered before the data turned into a series of complex graphs that represented the star's emissions. Evelyn's eyes scanned the lines, but something was off about the light curves. They weren't as they should be. "These irregular fluctuations," she muttered to herself, tapping a finger against her lips. "They're not natural. This is strange." As she adjusted the data parameters, the visualization began to morph into something terrifyingly clear. A dip, a sudden drop in the emission patterns, like something was feeding on the star. The star was dimming, its light disappearing in waves, and every time it did, the signature of something unknown appeared in the data. Something massive, far bigger than anything she had seen before. "Tyler, come look at this," she ordered. Tyler stepped closer, peering at the screen, but his expression turned from curiosity to unease as the data unfolded before them. Is that a massive object?" His voice was uncertain. Evelyn's heart began to race. A cold sensation crawled down her spine. "I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it's draining the star's energy. It's feeding on it." "That's impossible," Tyler said, though there was doubt in his tone. "Nothing can feed on a star. The energy output of a star like that is beyond anything we can comprehend," Evelyn finished for him, her voice barely a whisper. She felt a growing unease, like a terrible truth was about to unravel before her eyes. The data didn't lie. This star, HD 192273, was dying, and whatever was out there was the cause. Evelyn felt her stomach drop as she took a step back, realizing that they were witnessing something that defied the laws of physics. The thought sent a shiver through her entire body. She grabbed the phone on the desk and dialed a number she had never called before. "Director Simmons, it's Harper. We need to discuss an urgent matter." The phone rang once, twice. Then the voice of the director came through, groggy and annoyed, clearly not expecting a call at this hour. "What is it, Harper?" "It's late." "I think we've found something," Evelyn said, trying to steady her voice. "Something that could change everything we know about the universe." There was a long silence on the other end. "Go on." "There's a star in Pegasus. HD 192273. It's dying, but not naturally. There's someone feeding on it. We're seeing patterns in the light emissions. It's being drained, and I think we're looking at something that shouldn't exist. Evelyn didn't need to explain further. She could already hear the director's sharp intake of breath, and she could sense the wheels in his mind turning. "Send me everything you have," he said, his tone suddenly serious. This could be bigger than you think." 2 days later, Evelyn stood in front of a larger audience than she had ever imagined. The observation room was filled with the brightest minds in astrophysics, mathematicians, and astronomers, her peers, her mentors, and her critics. They were all gathered for one purpose: to analyze the data from the James Webb Space Telescope and figure out what was happening to HD 192273. The room was tense. Every eye was fixed on the screen, where the patterns of the star's emissions played out like a cosmic symphony, pulsing and warping as if to some unseen force. Evelyn could feel their skepticism, the doubt in their eyes. They had all seen strange things before: anomalies in the cosmic microwave background, unexplainable gravitational wave signals, but this was something else entirely. Evelyn took a deep breath and addressed the room. "We've run simulations. We've checked the data against all known variables. We even attempted to match it with any known phenomena, like dark matter interactions, supernova remnants, or even theoretical black hole activity. Nothing matches, nothing explains what we're seeing." Dr. Kwon, a theoretical physicist who had gained fame for his research on exotic matter, spoke up. "Are you suggesting that something is consuming the star?" Evelyn's gaze locked with his. "Yes. And it's not just draining the star's energy, it's siphoning it. Over time, it's as if the star itself is being eaten." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. "Impossible," Kwon said, shaking his head. "There is no known phenomenon in astrophysics that would allow such a thing." "What if it's not a phenomenon?" Evelyn countered. "What if it's something else, something we can't even begin to comprehend? This could be evidence of..." "Of what, Dr. Harper?" Kwon interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "What could it be, then? Are you suggesting an alien entity is eating stars?" Evelyn hesitated, her mind racing to find the right words. "I'm suggesting that we may be witnessing the death of a star at the hands of something far older and more advanced than anything we've ever encountered. Maybe even something we were never meant to understand." As she spoke, the lights in the room flickered for a moment. It was a brief interruption, but it was enough to break the fragile tension that had been building. Everyone froze. Their gazes snapped to the ceiling, and Evelyn's pulse quickened. It wasn't just the lights. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, the air suddenly thick with something unexplainable. A chill ran through Evelyn's spine as she instinctively glanced at the observation window. Outside, the vastness of space stretched endlessly, the stars twinkling in their distant glory. And then, at the far edge of the galaxy, her eyes caught something strange. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw a flicker in the star field, a shadow moving across the sky. Her breath caught. She wasn't sure if it was just a trick of the light or if something was indeed moving out there. Something alive. "Dr. Harper," Kwon's voice cut through her thoughts. Evelyn's mind raced, but she forced herself to focus. The data was still coming in, still showing the same strange patterns. "I need to run a new set of simulations," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Something's happening out there. I don't know what it is, but we need to find out." As she walked toward her workstation, her fingers trembled slightly. Her thoughts kept drifting back to that shadow in the sky. Had it been real? Or had something else been watching them? As Evelyn's fingers flew over the keyboard, she tried to focus on the data, forcing herself to ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. But that shadow, That fleeting flicker of movement in the sky was not something she could simply dismiss. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional murmur of her colleagues as they continued analysing the data. Evelyn pushed forward, pulling up a new set of calculations that had been running in the background. The star's light curves were distorted again, flickering in a rhythm that didn't quite make sense. Each pulse seemed to synchronize with something deep in the fabric of space itself. The fluctuations were getting stronger, more intense. Suddenly, the screen flickered again, and a new pattern emerged, something unlike any natural cosmic phenomenon. It was almost like a pulse of sound waves, though they were invisible and undetectable by normal means. The signal wasn't coming from the star anymore. It was coming from the void. Evelyn stared at the new data. Her hands gripped the edge of her desk, her breath shallow. There was something deeply unnatural about it. The energy seemed to be pushing outward, expanding through space itself, as though it was feeding on more than just the star, as if it was reaching out, trying to communicate, or perhaps even invade. "Dr. Harper, you're going to want to see this." Tyler's voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up, startled, and saw that Tyler had pulled up a separate screen displaying a waveform. "Is this from the star?" Evelyn asked, stepping closer. "No," Tyler replied, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It's a different kind of signal, almost like a transmission, and it's directed at us." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "Directed at us? You're sure?" Tyler nodded, clicking a few buttons to bring the waveform into clearer focus. The signal was unlike any radio wave or transmission ever recorded. It pulsed in a pattern that felt almost intentional. There were bursts of data that she couldn't explain, like a coded message. Every repetition of the pattern grew more intense, as though whatever was behind the signal was learning, adapting. The implications were terrifying. Could it be that the entity consuming the star wasn't just a cosmic anomaly? Could it be something intelligent? Something that knew exactly where to direct its efforts? Evelyn's mind raced. If something was capable of manipulating energy on this scale, of feeding on a star, and potentially sending signals, what else could it do? Was this the first time it had acted in this way? Or had it been targeting other stars, slowly working its way toward more populated systems? "Director Simmons needs to see this immediately," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. Tyler hesitated for a moment, but then his fingers flew over the keyboard as he sent the data through to the director. The room was heavy with silence as they awaited the response. Evelyn tried to steady her nerves, but the sense of dread that had been creeping into her thoughts was now undeniable. The lights flickered once more. The next few hours were a blur of frantic calculations, simulations, and urgent communications with other space observatories. The entire team had been summoned to Greenbelt as Director Simmons personally ordered the data to be reviewed. It was clear now that they had something that transcended science, something beyond what they could explain. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer just observing a star dying. They were witnessing a cosmic predator at work, something that fed on the very essence of a star, draining its life force like a parasite. Director Simmons was briefed, and he came to the conclusion that Evelyn had feared. "This isn't just a random anomaly," he said, his voice tight. "There's something deliberate about it. The fact that we're receiving a directed signal means it's aware of us. It's trying to communicate." Evelyn nodded grimly. "Whatever it is, it's far older and more advanced than we are. We're not dealing with something that just happened to stumble upon this system." The room fell silent as they all considered the implications. What kind of entity could consume a star and then reach out to a distant civilization? A civilization that, by all rights, shouldn't even be on its radar. It was a question that lingered in the air, like a suffocating fog. "I don't think we're just dealing with one star," Evelyn finally said, breaking the silence. "If this thing can drain the energy from a star, it could potentially do this to every star in its path." "What's its goal?" asked Dr. Kwan, his voice barely above a whisper. "What does it want with the energy of the stars?" "We don't know," Evelyn said, "but I fear it's only a matter of time before it makes its move." At that moment, an alert popped up on one of the side screens. Evelyn's heart skipped as she read the message. It was a request from another observatory. They had detected something strange. "We have to see this," Evelyn said, grabbing her tablet and rushing toward the screen. The image was grainy, distorted by the distance, but it was clear enough. In another galaxy, farther than HD 192273, in a distant corner of the cosmos, another star was vanishing. Not just dying, vanishing. The same peculiar pattern of dimming that they had seen with HD 192273 was now occurring in another distant star. The entity, whatever it was, had moved. It was no longer limited to the Pegasus constellation. "We need to act fast," Evelyn said, her voice hoarse. "Whatever is doing this is spreading. We may not have much time before it reaches a star system closer to us." The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. The news had leaked, unsurprisingly, to the public, and soon the entire world was captivated by the mysterious, star-eating entity. A sense of unease began to spread, even as governments scrambled to respond to the unknown threat. Evelyn and her team continued their work, but with each passing hour, it became clearer that they were running out of time. The energy patterns were growing more complex, almost as though the entity was evolving. Each star it consumed added to its power, and as it fed, it grew more aware of its surroundings. But it wasn't until the signal changed that the true horror began to unfold. It was subtle at first. The rhythmic pulses of the signal began to shift. What had once seemed like an unintelligible pattern now seemed familiar. Evelyn stared at the waveform, her eyes wide with disbelief. She wasn't just interpreting data anymore. The signal was speaking. Not in words, but in frequencies. Vibrations that resonated with something deep in the human subconscious. It was as though the entity had learned how to communicate in a way that bypassed human logic entirely, communicating through pure primal emotion, fear, rage, hunger. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she realized what it was trying to say. And then, without warning, the signal changed again. This time, it was no longer directed at Earth. It was directed at her. A sudden, terrifying realization struck her like a lightning bolt. Whatever it was, whatever this thing was, it wasn't just trying to reach out to humanity. It was looking for something. And it had found it. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling silence, a stillness that seemed to stretch across the entire world. The signal had stopped pulsing, but the damage had been done. The entity, whatever it was, had made contact, and now the entire planet held its breath. Every scientist, every government official, and every citizen knew that they were no longer alone in the universe. And more disturbingly, something had marked them, had singled them out. Evelyn couldn't escape the feeling that the entity wasn't just a predator in the cosmic sense. It was hunting. She found herself staring at the endless sea of stars, her thoughts swirling in an endless loop. The more she learned about it, the more terrifying it became. The entity, it had an intelligence far beyond anything Earth could comprehend. It had observed humanity for only a few short days, yet it seemed to know them intimately, understand them, like it was studying them for some unknown purpose. But why? The world had entered a new era of uncertainty. The first direct message had been received. Not as a language, but as a resonance, a pattern of frequencies that twisted their perception. Governments were on edge, security was heightened, and the general public was beginning to panic. The entity wasn't just observing the Earth. It was watching, learning, waiting for something. And now it was clear. It was coming for them. At the Space Science Institute, Evelyn's mind raced as she sifted through new streams of data coming from the James Webb Space Telescope. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. It had been 2 days since the last communication from the entity, and Evelyn had been unable to find any trace of activity coming from the far reaches of space. At least, nothing observable. But then came the anomaly. She was reviewing data from a distant corner of the galaxy when she noticed a faint ripple in the electromagnetic spectrum. It was subtle but unmistakable. The same pattern she had seen in the star-dimming signals. Those eerie pulses, those strange undulations in the light that felt far too alive. This wasn't just energy from a star. It was different. And this time it wasn't just one star. It was a cluster of them, located in an area that, until now, had been quiet. But as the patterns unfolded, something far more sinister became clear. The same phenomenon was happening to them. Stars across multiple galaxies were dimming, one by one, like a cosmic feast unfolding in slow motion. Every star in the region seemed to flicker out, as though something was methodically siphoning their energy. "Tyler," Evelyn called, her voice strained. "I need you to run a new set of projections. This isn't just a single isolated event. Whatever's doing, this is spreading. Fast. It's targeting entire star clusters now." Tyler's face paled as he glanced at the data on the screen. He immediately began running the necessary models, but his hands faltered. I don't understand," he stammered. "This pattern, it's too specific. Too targeted." Evelyn felt a cold knot form in her stomach as she stared at the screen. The ripples of the entity's signal were still there, faint but growing stronger by the second. This wasn't just the entity feeding. It was organizing, adapting. And then, just as the realization settled in, the signal began to pulse once more. This time it was louder. The hum of the transmission vibrated through the walls, shaking the entire building. It wasn't a simple signal anymore. This was a raw, a forceful, almost aggressive pulse of energy, like the roar of a star collapsing in on itself. But it wasn't coming from space. It was coming from deep within the planet itself. Evelyn and Tyler stood frozen, watching the data spike wildly on their screens. A strange noise filled the room, almost like a low hum vibrating in the air, and the entire building seemed to tremble. It wasn't the sort of tremor caused by an earthquake. This was different. This was something far more alien. Is it happening on Earth?" Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Evelyn could respond, her phone buzzed. She picked it up to find an urgent message from Director Simmons. "We need to meet now. It's begun." She didn't hesitate. "Tyler, get the rest of the team. We're going to the main conference room." As they moved quickly through the corridors, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The message was clear now. Whatever the entity was, it wasn't just targeting stars anymore. It was adapting, evolving, and it was coming. When they entered the conference room, Director Simmons was already there, his face pale, his eyes shadowed with a growing concern. Around the table were the other scientists and top officials from around the world. They had been called together to face the growing crisis, but no one knew what to do. "We've detected something," Simmons said, his voice grim. "Something we didn't expect. The signal. It's not just transmitting through space anymore. It's moving through the Earth's own electromagnetic fields." "What do you mean?" Evelyn asked, her voice low. It's infiltrating our systems. We've traced its path to global communication networks. Every satellite, every military system. It's like it's finding a way to interact with them directly. There are reports of electronic disruptions all over the world, and it's only getting worse. Evelyn's stomach dropped. The entity wasn't just feeding on stars. It was learning how to communicate, and now it was trying to take control. "We have to stop this," Tyler said urgently, his face flushed with fear. "We can't let it reach the core of Earth's communication systems." "We don't even know what it is," Simmons replied, his voice strained, "but we've confirmed that it has somehow adapted to Earth's signals. It's infiltrating every satellite network, every deep space communication array, every system that we rely on." The room went silent and Evelyn's mind raced. The implications were staggering. If the entity had the ability to control Earth's technology, if it could subvert their systems, it wouldn't just be a matter of watching stars die. It could bring the entire planet to its knees. And if it learned how to manipulate their weapons, the consequences would be catastrophic. "We can't wait any longer," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "We need to find a way to sever the connection, cut off its access to Earth's systems before it learns to control us completely." The room erupted in chaos as military and scientific minds debated the next move. There was no time to waste, no more room for error. The entity was coming, and it was already inside. Evelyn knew they were running out of options. The entity had spread too far, too fast, and now it was not just attacking stars. It was laying siege to Earth itself. Every method they tried to use to block its signal was futile. It adapted to every countermeasure they threw at it, learning from each failure. It was like fighting a shadow, something that existed in every place at once, moving faster than they could track. As the days passed, the situation only worsened. Cities around the world reported blackouts, technological failures, and strange electromagnetic anomalies. At first, it was isolated, but then it began to spread across continents, across borders. The entity's reach was everywhere. In the darkest corners of the Earth, there were reports of bizarre sightings, strange lights in the sky, strange phenomena disrupting human senses. People spoke of voices in the air, whispering in an ancient tongue, sending chills through their spines. The final hours were drawing near, and Evelyn had no answers left. The entity was still feeding, still learning. But what would happen when it was done? She glanced at the data one last time, her heart heavy with dread. The shadow in the stars, the message in the signal. Whatever it was too late to stop. But there was one thing she couldn't forget. The entity wasn't just looking at the stars anymore. It was looking at us, and it had found what it was searching for.